If you've ever been betrayed by the very people you're supposed to trust, the ones you sacrificed everything for, then you know the unique kind of chill that seeps into your bones. It's a cold that has nothing to do with the weather. It's the death of warmth, the freezing of a heart. For those of you who get it, smash that like button and subscribe, because you're about to hear a story of how that deep, soul-crushing cold can be forged into a weapon of absolute justice. This is how I took back my life from the daughter I adored and the son-in-law who saw me as nothing more than a wallet to be emptied. You will obey my husband, Dad, or you'll leave this house. Those are the only choices. My daughter Clara's voice was sharp, a shard of glass where a gentle melody used to be. Her arms were crossed, a defensive posture she had picked up from him, from Marcus. She stood beside him, a smaller, paler echo of his smug arrogance. Marcus, my son-in-law, didn't even grant me the dignity of looking at me. He was too busy inspecting his perfectly manicured nails, a small, cruel smile playing on his lips. He knew he had won. He thought he had me cornered, an old man with nowhere to go, no resources, no fight left in him. He was wrong, dead wrong. In that moment, watching the two of them, a strange calm washed over me. The hurt, the searing betrayal that had been my constant companion for months, receded. It was replaced by something pure, something clean. It was the clarity of a single, unshakable purpose. A slow smile spread across my own face, a genuine one. It must have been unnerving, because for the first time, Clara's composure flickered. A hint of confusion, maybe even fear, entered her eyes. "All right," I said, my voice even and steady. "If those are the terms." I turned without another word, walked up the stairs to the guest room that had been my cage for the past year, and pulled out the small, worn suitcase I kept under the bed. I didn't have much to pack. They had seen to that, stripping my life down to its barest essentials. A few changes of clothes, a photograph of my beloved Eleanor, and a worn copy of a book on Roman architecture. I zipped it shut, took one last look around the sterile room that held no memories I wanted to keep, and walked back down the stairs. They were still standing in the exact same spot in the foyer, frozen, as if they were actors on a stage who had forgotten their next line. They had expected me to beg, to cry, to plead for their mercy. They had orchestrated this entire confrontation to break me, to finally grind me down into the helpless dependent they needed me to be. My compliance, my silence, my smile, it was not in their script. I walked right past them, my suitcase bumping gently against my leg. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. I could feel their shock radiating off them in waves. I opened the front door, the very door I had helped pay for, and stepped out into the cool evening air. Just before I pulled it shut, I paused and looked back. Marcus's face was a mask of disbelief, his mouth slightly agape. Clara's was pale, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. She was finally realizing that the dog she had kicked had just calmly unhooked its own leash. I pulled the door closed, and the solid, satisfying click was the sound of the first nail being hammered into their coffin. I smiled again, took a deep breath of free air, and walked away. They had no idea I wasn't just leaving. I was going to war. To understand the depth of their betrayal, you have to understand the man I was. I'm a structural engineer by trade, or I was. I spent 40 years of my life designing the bones of buildings, ensuring they could withstand storms and the slow, relentless pull of time. My work was my passion. It was a world of precision, of calculation, of unforgiving realities. A single miscalculation, a moment of sloppiness, and the whole thing comes crashing down. I applied the same principles to my life. Build on a strong foundation, be patient, and never, ever take shortcuts. My foundation was my wife, Eleanor. She was the grace to my logic, the poetry to my prose. For 35 years, she was my everything. And then, 3 years ago, a sudden illness took her from me, and the entire structure of my world collapsed. The silence in our big, empty house was a physical weight. Every room echoed with her absence. Clara, my only child, was devastated, or so I thought. She had always been the center of my universe. I poured everything I had into her, My time, my money, my love. I paid for the best schools, a lavish wedding to a man I privately distrusted, and when they wanted to buy a house, I gave them the down payment without a second thought. It was a beautiful house, a sprawling new construction in a gated community. It was also, I noted with my professional, I bill a little too quickly with materials that were just a little too cheap. But Clara was so happy, her eyes shining as she talked about her future with Marcus, and I buried my concerns. A father's job is to provide, to support. After Eleanor passed, Clara's concern for me seemed to amplify. She would call me every day, her voice thick with worry. Dad, you can't stay in that big house all alone. It's not healthy. You'll be so lonely. Marcus would get on the phone, his voice slick with manufactured sincerity. Arthur, we want you with us. We're family. What's ours is yours. It was a constant, gentle pressure. They painted a beautiful picture. I would sell my house, the one Eleanor and I had filled with a lifetime of love, and move into their spacious guest suite. I would have company, home-cooked meals, the laughter of my daughter nearby. I was grieving, I was lonely, and I was so foolishly trusting. I agreed. I sold the house that held my entire life story and handed over the proceeds to Marcus. Nearly $1 million. I'll invest this for you, Arthur, he'd said, clapping me on the shoulder with a bonhomie that felt rehearsed. I've got a guy who works miracles with portfolios. We'll make sure you're set for life. Just think of it as our family fund. He had me sign some papers, which he glossed over as formalities for the investment firm. Like a lamb to the slaughter, I signed without reading the fine print. I signed away my life savings, my independence, my future, all for the promise of not being alone. The first 6 months were exactly as they promised. I was a cherished guest. Clara would cook my favorite meals. Marcus would ask for my stories about the old days. I felt needed, loved. I started to think I had made the right decision. But foundations built on lies are destined to crack. The change was gradual, insidious. It started with small things. Marcus would make comments under his breath about the cost of groceries. That organic stuff your dad likes isn't cheap. You know, my favorite meals were replaced with whatever was easiest. My stories were cut short with an impatient sigh. I was no longer a guest. I was a tenant. And then I became a burden. The guest suite started to feel more like a servant's quarters. Clara would leave lists of chores for me on the kitchen counter. Dad, since you're not doing anything all day, could you please handle the landscaping? Marcus began treating me with open contempt. He'd talk about me as if I wasn't in the room. The old man is costing us a fortune. When is that investment of his going to start paying off? He'd ask me for money for household expenses, and when I'd remind him that he had all my money, he'd just scoff and walk away. I was living in a house I paid for, eating food bought with a fortune I provided, and being treated like a freeloader. Clara, my darling Clara, did nothing. She would watch with downcast eyes, her guilt a palpable thing in the room. But she never spoke up. She had chosen her side. She had chosen him. Her weakness was his greatest weapon. The moment of absolute, horrifying clarity came on a Tuesday night. I couldn't sleep. The anxiety was a knot in my stomach. I went downstairs for a glass of water and heard their voices coming from the living room, low and urgent. I stopped in the hallway, hidden by the shadows. Eavesdropping is a contemptible act, but something told me my very survival depended on it. I can't keep this up, Marcus, Clara was saying, her voice a strained whisper. He looks so sad all the time. He gave us everything. Oh, boo-hoo. Marcus sneered. The venom in his voice was chilling. He gave us what we were owed. Do you have any idea how much it costs to maintain this lifestyle? His little nest egg barely covers the mortgage and the car payments. It's almost gone. My blood ran cold. Gone? $1 million? In a year. Gone. Clara echoed my thought, her voice trembling. What do you mean, gone? You said you invested it. You said it was growing. There was a short, harsh laugh from Marcus. Invested? Oh, I invested it, all right. I invested it in us. In this house, in your new car, in that ridiculous club membership you had to have. The crypto thing didn't exactly pan out, okay? It was a bad tip. But don't worry, I have a plan. What plan? She asked, her voice small. The old man is becoming a liability. Marcus said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. He's just sitting around, eating our food, taking up space. It's time for the next phase. I've been looking into some homes. There's a state-run facility about an hour away, Golden Vistas. It's not the Ritz, but it's clean. And more importantly, it's cheap. Once he signs over his pension and Social Security to cover the fees, we'll be free and clear. We can sell this house, downsize, and get back on our feet. Silence. I held my breath, praying, pleading for my daughter to scream, to rage, to defend me. A home, Clara finally whispered. Marcus, we can't. He's my father. He's a drain, Clara. Marcus's voice rose, sharp and angry. Do you want to lose all this? Do you want to go back to living in that tiny apartment? He had a good life. It's our turn now. He is old. His time is over. Our time is just beginning. You need to get him on board. Make him think it's his idea. Tell him he's becoming too much for you to handle. Cry a little. You're good at that. If he resists, we make his life here so miserable he'll be begging to go. I heard a soft sniffle, the sound of my daughter's spirit finally breaking. Okay, she whispered. Okay, Marcus. I backed away silently, my hand over my mouth to stifle a cry. I stumbled back to my room, my body trembling, not with fear, but with a rage so profound it felt like a physical force. The man I was, the trusting father, the grieving widower, died in that hallway. In his place, a structural engineer was reborn, one who had just discovered a fatal, foundational flaw in the structure of his life. And I knew, with chilling certainty, exactly how to bring the whole rotten building crashing down. My first call the next morning was to David Chun, my lawyer for over 30 years and one of my oldest friends. I met him at a small coffee shop far from the sterile suburb where I was imprisoned. When I walked in, his face registered shock. Arthur? My God, you look like you've seen a ghost. I probably did. I felt like one. Over 2 cups of black coffee, I laid out the whole sordid story. The money, the lies, the overheard conversation, the plan to ship me off to a state-run home. David listened patiently, his expression growing darker with every word. When I was finished, he was silent for a long time, just staring into his cup. The papers you signed, he finally said. Do you have any idea what they were? Marcus said they were for an investment firm. I mumbled, shame washing over me. I didn't even read them. I trusted him. Arthur, you're one of the most meticulous men I know, David said gently. Grief makes fools of us all. He leaned forward. Okay, here's what we do. First, you go back there and you play the part. You are a frail, forgetful, defeated old man. You are more of a burden than ever. Let them get comfortable. Let them get arrogant. Give them enough rope, and they will hang themselves with glee. Meanwhile, I'm going to find out what you signed. That was the beginning of my performance. I became the man they wanted me to be. I started forgetting things, names, appointments, where I'd left my glasses. I would shuffle when I walked. I would sit in my chair and stare blankly at the television for hours. I made myself smaller, quieter, more pathetic. It worked beautifully. Their attitude shifted from contempt to a kind of pitying impatience. They were winning. The end was in sight. Clara would bring me my meals on a tray, her eyes filled with a guilt that made me want to scream, but I just gave her a weak, watery smile and thanked her. Marcus would pat me on the shoulder, a gesture that was both condescending and proprietary. Don't you worry about a thing, Arthur. We'll take care of you. Oh, I knew they would. While I was playing the part of a senile old fool, David was a whirlwind of legal action. He filed a subpoena for the records from Marcus's bank. It took a few weeks, but when the documents came in, David called me for another meeting. He spread the papers across his conference table. It's worse than we thought. Arthur, he said, his voice grim. There was no investment. There was no portfolio. The day after you signed the papers, Marcus transferred the entire $950,000 into his personal checking account. What were the papers I signed? I asked, my voice hoarse. David slid a document towards me. It was a durable power of attorney. A full, unrestricted power of attorney, giving Marcus complete control over all my assets. He tricked you into giving him total legal authority over your finances, David explained. It's fraud, Arthur. Blatant criminal fraud. He used your life savings as his personal slush fund. The bank statements told the whole story. A $60,000 sports car, a $10,000 vacation to an exclusive resort, five-figure shopping sprees for Clara, and a massive $200,000 transfer to a dubious cryptocurrency exchange, an account that was now worth less than $500. He hadn't just spent my money, he had incinerated it. "We can sue him," David said, his eyes hard. "We can press charges. He'll go to jail." I shook my head. "No, not yet. A lawsuit is public, but it's not personal. Jail is a punishment, but it's not justice. I want him to feel what I felt. I want to watch the structure of his life crumble around him. I want to be the one holding the demolition plunger." David studied my face. "What do you have in mind?" "Marcus is an arrogant peacock," I said. "His reputation, his image of success, is everything to him. He's planning their annual garden party in 3 weeks. It's his big event to show off to all his so-called friends and business associates. That's where it will end, in front of everyone. But the money was only one part of the equation. I needed more leverage. I needed something that would not just ruin them financially, but eviscerate them completely. And then I remember the house. On one of my first days living there, my engineers I had caught something. A hairline crack in the foundation wall in the basement, cleverly hidden behind a water heater. I'd also noticed that the main support beam in the crawl space seemed undersized for the span it was covering. I had mentioned it to Marcus. "You should get this looked at," I'd told him. "This is a clear sign of substrate settling, probably due to improper soil compaction before the foundation was poured. If you don't address it, it could compromise the entire load-bearing frame of the house." He had laughed in my face. A wheezing, condescending laugh. "Oh, leave it to the expert, huh, Arthur? The house passed inspection. The builders are the best in the state. Stop looking for problems where there aren't any, you doddery old fool." He had called me a doddery old fool. I never forgot that. Now, that insult became my key. For the next 2 weeks, I made secret trips to the basement when they were out. I took high-resolution photos of the crack, which had visibly widened. I used a micrometer to measure the deflection in the support beam under load. My calculations were chilling. The beam was already failing. It was a slow, silent process, but it was inevitable. The house was literally breaking its own back. I compiled my findings into a detailed, professional report, complete with stress calculations and photographic evidence. It was the kind of report I used to submit to major construction firms, a document of cold, hard, irrefutable facts. I sent a copy anonymously to the city building inspector's office and another to their homeowner's insurance company, along with a cover letter detailing the homeowner's willful negligence in addressing a known structural defect. I knew the bureaucratic wheels would turn slowly, but I also knew they were unstoppable. All I had to do was wait for the party. The day of the garden party arrived, a perfect sunny Saturday. The backyard was a sea of pastel dresses and khaki pants. Marcus was in his element, a drink in one hand, gesturing expansively with the other. He was wearing an absurdly expensive watch, one I recognized from his bank statements. He was holding court, bragging about a new business venture he was about to launch, a venture I knew was being funded by the last dregs of my life savings. Clara drifted through the crowd, her smile as brittle as spun sugar. She looked tired, the strain of her complicity etched in fine lines around her eyes. She saw me emerge from the house, and her smile faltered. They had expected me to stay in my room, the pathetic old man hidden away from their important guests. Instead, I had spent the morning preparing. I was wearing a dark gray suit that I had kept hidden in the back of my closet, one Eleanor had always loved. It was tailored, sharp. I had gotten a haircut. I stood tall. The shuffle was gone. The vacant stare was replaced by a look of calm, focused intensity. I walked onto the patio, and a few conversations faltered as people took in the transformation. I was no longer the ghost at their feast. I was the executioner. I let them enjoy their charade for another hour. I mingled politely, accepting condolences from old family friends who remarked how frail I had been looking lately. "I'm feeling much better now," I would reply with a thin smile. Clarity can be a wonderful tonic. Finally, the moment came. Marcus stood on the steps of the deck, tapping a glass with a spoon to get everyone's attention. "Friends, family," he boomed, his face flushed with champagne and self-importance. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate another year of success with us. Clara and I are so blessed. We have a beautiful home, wonderful friends, and an exciting future ahead. I'd like to propose a toast." That was my cue. I stepped forward, my voice cutting through the air, not loud, but clear and resonant with authority. "If I may, Marcus, I believe I have a toast of my own to make." A ripple of surprise went through the crowd. Marcus stared at me, his smile frozen on his face, annoyance flickering in his eyes. "Dad, now's not really the—" "Oh, I insist," I said, walking to stand beside him, taking in the entire audience of his success. I could feel Clara's terrified gaze on me. "This won't take long." I raised my own glass of water. "Today, I want to toast to the concept of a strong foundation. As an engineer, I know that a structure is only as good as the foundation it's built upon. The same is true for families. A family must be built on a foundation of trust, of honesty, of mutual respect. Without those things, no matter how beautiful the facade, the structure is doomed to collapse." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I looked directly at my daughter. "Clara, I always thought we had a strong foundation. I dedicated my life to giving you the best of everything, to ensuring you were safe and secure. When your mother passed and I was adrift, you and your husband offered me a place in your home, a place in your family. I was grateful, so grateful, in fact, that I entrusted you with everything I had left in this world. The entire proceeds from the sale of my home, my life's work, nearly $1 million. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Marcus's face had gone from flushed to a sickly white. His knuckles were white where he gripped his champagne glass. "Marcus here," I continued, turning to him with my polite smile, "promised to be a wise steward of that foundation. He promised to invest it, to make it grow, to ensure my security for the rest of my days. But it seems Marcus is not a builder. He is a demolitions expert." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a neatly folded stack of papers. "This, for those who are interested, is a bank statement. It shows a single transfer of $950,000 from a joint account into a personal account belonging solely to Marcus. And these," I said, pulling out another set of papers, "are the receipts. A new car, exotic vacations, designer clothes, and a $200,000 gamble on a cryptocurrency that is now worthless. The foundation, you see, was looted. There is nothing left." The silence was absolute. The only sound was the chirping of birds, oblivious to the human drama unfolding. Marcus looked like he had been turned to stone. But the financial foundation wasn't the only one Marcus was careless with, I said, my voice dropping slightly. He was also careless with the literal foundation of this very house. I gestured around at the beautiful home. "I warned you, Marcus, didn't I? About the crack in the basement wall. About the undersized support beam. I told you the house was settling, that it was dangerous. But you call me a doddery old fool. You dismissed the warnings of a man who spent 40 years ensuring buildings don't fall down." I pulled out one last document from my pocket. It was a letter with the official city letterhead. "This is a notice of condemnation from the city's building inspector, which I believe was delivered to your front door yesterday morning. I imagine you haven't had the courage to open it. It states that this house is structurally unsound and unfit for habitation. Your homeowner's insurance, to whom I also sent my report, has informed me that due to your willful negligence, your policy is now null and void. You are uninsured, unmortgageable, and as of Monday morning, you will be homeless." That's when Clara finally broke. A terrible, ragged sob tore from her throat, and she collapsed onto a patio chair, her face in her hands. Marcus just stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, no sound coming out. The color had completely drained from his face. His empire, built on my money and his arrogance, had just been leveled in under 5 minutes. I looked at my daughter, my heart aching with a sorrow so deep it felt ancient. "You gave me a choice, Clara. You told me to obey your husband or leave. I chose to leave, but I'm not leaving the way you intended. I'm leaving with my dignity, which you tried to steal. My lawyer will be in touch about recovering what's left of my money and suing you for the rest. As for you, Marcus, I said, turning to the broken man beside me, you saw an easy mark. A weak old man. You should have seen a structural engineer. You should have known that I understand, better than anyone, that when a foundation is rotten, the only thing to do is tear the whole building down. I set my glass of water down on the table, turned my back on the wreckage of their lives, and walked away. I didn't run. I walked, with my head held high, through the stunned crowd of their friends. No one said a word. As I reached the edge of the yard, I heard the sound of Marcus's champagne glass shattering on the flagstones. It was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. In the aftermath, everything happened just as I had planned. My lawyer, David, was ruthless. He filed a civil suit that froze all of Marcus and Clara's remaining assets. Faced with irrefutable evidence of fraud and the threat of criminal charges, Marcus settled quickly, signing over the title to their cars and liquidating what few legitimate assets he had. It wasn't everything he had stolen, not even close, but it was enough. The house was condemned and eventually seized by the bank when they inevitably defaulted on a mortgage they could no longer pay. They were forced to declare bankruptcy. Marcus's reputation was shattered. His fair-weather friends and business associates vanished overnight. The last I heard, he was working a low-level sales job, and they were living in a cramped rental apartment on the bad side of town. I took the money I recovered and bought a small, bright condominium in a quiet building downtown. It had a balcony overlooking a park, and I filled it with books and music and the smell of good coffee. I reconnected with old friends from my firm, men I had lost touch with during my years of grief and subsequent captivity. We started a weekly poker game. I began volunteering at the local university, guest lecturing for the engineering students. I found a new purpose. The silence in my new home wasn't the crushing weight of absence I had felt after Eleanor died. It was the peaceful, restorative silence of solitude. I was alone, but for the first time in years, I was not lonely. Clara tried to reach me. The call started a few weeks after the party. Then came the emails, long, rambling messages filled with apologies, self-pity, and blame. She blamed Marcus for manipulating her. She blamed her own weakness. She blamed her grief. She never fully took responsibility for the choice she made, the cold, cruel words she spoke in that foyer. I never responded. A few months later, she showed up at my building. The doorman, under my strict instructions, did not let her up. She waited in the lobby for hours, crying. I watched her on the security camera feed, my heart a dead, heavy thing in my chest. I felt a pang of the old love, the instinct to go down and comfort my child, but I held back. A structure that has suffered catastrophic failure cannot be patched up with a coat of paint. It needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. She needed to find her own foundation before she could even think of helping to rebuild ours. The wound she had carved into my heart was too deep. Perhaps one day it would scar over enough for me to look at her without seeing her standing next to him, her face hard and unforgiving. But that day was a long way off. Forgiveness, I realized, is a courtesy, not an obligation. Justice, on the other hand, is a necessity. I don't see what I did as revenge, not in the petty, vindictive sense. I see it as a restoration of balance. It was a painful, necessary recalibration of the world. They tried to erase me, to reduce a lifetime of hard work and love into a line item on their budget, a problem to be disposed of. I simply reminded them that I was the architect of the very world they took for granted, and that the architect always holds the blueprints. I did not destroy them. I merely revealed the truth of what they had built their lives upon, a foundation of lies, greed, and sand. And when the storm came, it washed it all away. So I ask you, the person watching this, what would you have done? Did I go too far, or did they get exactly what they deserved? Share your thoughts and your own stories of betrayal in the comments below. Sometimes just telling the story is the first step to taking your power back. And please, don't forget to subscribe. There are many more stories of justice that need to be told.